The Congressional Human Rights Caucus is very pleased to open this hearing on human rights issues in Yugoslavia. I think it's important for all of us to begin by underscoring the purpose of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, which is a bipartisan activity of the Congress, and which has one single objective, and that is to diminish and hopefully eventually to eliminate human rights abuses wherever they occur. Over the last number of years, we have been concerned with human rights conditions on every continent. We have examined human rights violations in countries that have non-democratic regimes and countries that have democratic regimes. And it is our conviction that human rights are indivisible, that the violation of human rights of any group or any individual, for whatever reasons, ethnic, religious, linguistic, cultural, are human rights violations that ought to concern all of us. The most distinguished chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, has arrived, and I would like to call on him first to make whatever observations he would care to do so. Senator Pell.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy and hospitality, permitting me to speak and run, but like you, we all have many commitments. I think that Yugoslavia is experiencing a very difficult time, and there's a real prospect, as we all know in this room particularly, that one or more of the republics may end up seceding. In this situation, you would think that the last thing the defenders of the unity of Yugoslavia would want to do is to stir up ethnic tension in Serbia, which was the core around which, as I understand it, Yugoslavia was built. Yet that's exactly what's happened. The Serbian government, acting with substantial support from the national government, is brutally repressing human and political rights in the autonomous province of Kosovo, which is 90% of the population of which is Albanian. And I can remember myself being there on the shores of Lake Ohrid, near the area of Kosovo, and seeing and realizing that the people around me were Albanian, not Serbs, not Montenegrins, not any other Yugoslav. In February of '89, a repressive state of emergency was imposed throughout Kosovo, and in the following month, the province's autonomous status was revoked. And now, mass arrests have taken place, killings and beatings have occurred, other harsh, restrictive measures have been imposed on the Albanian majority in Kosovo. And as a result of those actions, the Yugoslavia has been in violation of its political obligations, I emphasize the word obligations, under the Helsinki Final Act and under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We in our country must raise our voices and demand an end to repression in Kosovo. To my mind, it's very ironic that as the winds of freedom are blowing away repression elsewhere in Eastern Europe, they're being stifled in what was once thought to be a fairly progressive country. It can't be in Yugoslavia's or Serbia's interest to deny in Kosovo what's being exercised all over Eastern Europe. Human, cultural, political rights must be restored, should be restored, and I believe with the support around the world and the enthusiasm here will be restored before we're through. I understand, too, that last week the state of emergency was lifted in Kosovo and 100 political prisoners were released. It's about time they were, too. And that's good news, but it's not yet clear whether anything more than a cosmetic gesture has occurred. We all know that when the Chinese lifted martial law in Beijing, not much really changed. But it does appear that Yugoslavia is beginning to show sensitivity to world opinion. What the United States should do now is to keep the pressure on Yugoslavia to take effective action in support of human rights and reconciliation in Kosovo. And this is what today's hearing can help bring about. It's what the attendance of all of you in this room is chock-a-block with people, and the people outside in the halls and in the street are doing, and I congratulate you on it. I'd like to see this occur wherever Albanians are throughout the United States. I congratulate and thank every one of you for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for permitting me this opportunity.
I want to commend Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, the co-chairman of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, for organizing this hearing on the human rights situation in Yugoslavia. The situation is serious. What happens in Yugoslavia can have important repercussions far beyond Yugoslavia. My interest in this issue dates back to July 1986, when, as chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on European Affairs, I visited Yugoslavia and several Eastern European countries. It was apparent even then, 5 years after the end of the Tito era, that Yugoslavia was headed for a period of political change with a strong possibility of instability. Although instability often accompanies major change, it is a small price to pay for political democracy and economic freedom. If the intentions of those who lead a nation during the transition to greater individual liberty are honorable, in retrospect, any instability resulting from change will seem trivial compared to the benefits of the new democratic order. Unfortunately, not all leaders are honorable. In Yugoslavia, for example, some officials seem determined to lead by appealing to dark, nationalistic passions, rather than to the principles of political equality and economic justice for all. Short-sighted nationalist rhetoric that denies fair and equal treatment to all nationalities inevitably results in violence and disorder. This is what has happened in Yugoslavia. Irresponsible leaders have provoked attacks on Yugoslavian citizens of Albanian ethnic origins. Those same leaders also have usurped the very limited local political autonomy of Kosovo province. In the process, Yugoslavia has become the odd man out in Europe. As Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Germans, Hungarians, and others work to resolve their problems and their differences, the Kosovo province situation worsens. Helsinki Watch has labeled the Kosovo problem, quote, a frightening example, unquote, of one-party dictatorships. In February of this year, Enver Hadri, the leading human rights activist for Kosovo Albanians, was assassinated in Brussels. His death was but the latest in a wave of assassinations of Yugoslavian human rights activists abroad that has claimed 125 lives in the past 10 years. That figure does not include the hundreds of Kosovo Albanians who have been slaughtered in Yugoslavia in the past few years, some by inhumane and internationally outlawed dum-dum bullets. In addition, the European Parliament has passed a motion condemning the killings of ethnic Albanians by the Yugoslav army. According to the Helsinki Federation for Human Rights and Helsinki Watch, Yugoslavia is conducting a massive purge of ethnic Albanians. The solution to these problems, it seems to me, is free elections, respect for the human rights of all ethnic minorities, and a legal system that guarantees equal treatment for all. Additionally, Kosovo should have republic status with the same rights as the other Yugoslavian republics. Continuation of the widespread repressive policies will guarantee only widespread suffering and a further depreciation of world public opinion of Yugoslavia. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this opportunity to speak out once again on behalf of the Albanians of Kosovo. We have assembled here today an impressive, balanced array of witnesses, and I look forward to hearing their remarks. We are especially honored to have here today a delegation of 12 spokesmen from Kosovo. We welcome you. As respect leaders of your communities in Kosovo, you are the best source of current information on the communist dictatorship that denies your aspiration for freedom. Thank you for traveling so long to tell us the story. Let me also add, on a personal note, that I have visited Yugoslavia, and I believe I visited nearly every country in Europe at one point or another, either as a student or as a soldier or as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And over the years, it has impressed me that we should side on the side of human rights. That is where we get the greatest long-term gains in terms of our foreign policy. We should do it because it is right, and in the long run, it works out the best. But I fear that our State Department and others have worked out or are embracing a system of trying to be friendly with the Yugoslav government, not wanting to ruffle any feathers, and we are overlooking a very serious human rights problem, and that will come back to haunt us. I think if our country is careful to be on the side of human rights, we are better off in the long run, and we should be very careful to analyze those human rights, to report on them, and where they are being violated, to bring it to the surface. And you've done an excellent job of that.
The chair is very pleased to welcome a distinguished senator from New York, an individual who has been fighting for human rights in many parts of the world with great effectiveness and great distinction, and we are delighted to have him make a statement on behalf of his own views on this very important issue. Senator D'Amato.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very pleased to be here and privileged, and I apologize that I am not going to be able to stay, and I thank you for accommodating me. And Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me commend you for holding this hearing today. I also want to take the time out to commend Senators Pressler and Dole for their fight in the Senate of the United States to bring to the attention to the entire world and to sensitize the Congress and the administration to the human rights violations against Albanians in Yugoslavia. Now, I don't mean to be incendiary, but it seems to me that the administration can't have it two ways. You can't on one hand be saying that all's well, and yet when you have the country reports on human rights practices for 1989, it says that Albanians are being persecuted. And the administration has got to understand that you can't have a policy that makes everybody feel well. And that when it comes to human rights, we have an obligation to stand up wherever we may be called upon, to acknowledge what the facts are, to use the great strength, the great leverage that this nation does have. We don't have to go to war. No one says that. The people in Poland didn't win their freedom because we stood on the sideline. We helped. We gave them the kind of support, moral and otherwise. And the fact of the matter is that these struggles are going on today, and the Albanians today need our help, just as the Lithuanians need our help. I might say, I think it's incredible that we have a policy that will be based on the expedience, and that the nation would say that on the basis of one man, we are going to determine what policy to take. I have to tell you, Gorby mania has swept us. The fact that relationships with Yugoslavia, we want them to improve, we want them to be more open, we want them to have a capital system, that's fine. But I have to tell you something. Unless there are not dramatic changes as it relates to the kinds of human rights abuses that are taking place in the province of Kosovo, I would have to say to you that I believe that we should use our leverage in denying $300 million that goes to Yugoslavia through the World Bank, and that we have an obligation to stand for freedom wherever it is threatened by, and say that our economic leverage is a very fair instrumentality of foreign policy. I would hope that we could get people to respect all people, regardless of ethnic background, because that's the greatness of this country. And we have an obligation to set an example, because we were a land and an opportunity to have made up of the various backgrounds and heritages And I think that for us to be less than standing steadfastly and, yes, acknowledging the sins that are committed and doing something about it is a betrayal of this nation and what we're about. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you for these hearings, and I'd like the opportunity of being able to submit my full statements into the record as I've read in their entirety.
Without objection, we are most grateful for your presence and for your statement, Senator D'Amato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It now gives me great pleasure to call on the ranking Republican member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and indefatigable fighter for human rights, distinguished colleague and good friend, Congressman Broomfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, at the outset, congratulate you and Congressman Porter for having these important hearings. I'd like to begin my statement by commending you for the promoting greater respect for human rights in Yugoslavia and around the world. Today, the bells of freedom ring in Eastern Europe. Those in Yugoslavia are still silent. If they ring once again, it will be because of heroes like Mr. Periga, and he's here with us today. And for years, many of us in Congress considered Yugoslavia to be Western-oriented and concerned about human rights. In 1986, I was quickly disabused of the notion when Mr. Peter Ivasai, a Michigan resident, an American citizen, was arrested while visiting his family in Yugoslavia. His crime? Well, he was charged for demonstrating in front of the Yugoslavia embassy here in Washington back in 1981. More recently, I learned about Mr. Periga. He is a young Croatian human rights advocate who had been jailed and tortured by Yugoslav authorities for exercising the rights that all of us take for granted. Well, what was his crime? Collecting signatures to demand the release of all political prisoners in the country. In the files of the Yugoslavia police, Mr. Periga is considered a criminal. In the rest of the world, he is considered a hero. He is recognized as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International and other responsible human rights organizations. Mr. Periga is merely one soldier, a very brave and effective soldier, in an army of Yugoslavians of all ethnic background who are asking for the freedom that millions of other Eastern Europeans demanded in 1989, the year of the people. The American people are being asked to help support the countries of Eastern Europe. I believe Americans will be generous unless they feel their support is being used to prop up tyrannical regimes. Political prisoners still languish in Yugoslavia jails. Young ethnic Albanians are gunned down in the province of Kosovo. And some ethnic Albanians are gunned down in the province, as I said, in Kosovo, and some ethnic Albanians who were invited to this hearing. Yes, they have been denied the right to leave Yugoslavia. Clearly, Yugoslavia officials don't want Congress and the American people to know the human rights tragedy of that country. It's time for the United States to demand justice in Yugoslavia. No more business as usual in Belgrade. No more business. We want Yugoslavia officials to know that as long as they abuse their own people, they shouldn't expect any support from America. America has the leverage, and we should use it. Yugoslavia should know that it can never achieve economic growth without a growth in their respect for freedom and justice. Let me say also that I am cautiously optimistic about recent events in Yugoslavia. Many political prisoners have reportedly been freed, and the special measures in Kosovo have been ended. We all hope this new attitude on the part of the Yugoslav officials continue. I again want to congratulate Congressman Lantos, Congressman Porter of Illinois, and all of you that are here today. I know of no other issue that is more important to the human rights cause than the problems that we have in Yugoslavia. And I thank the gentleman very much for this opportunity to speak.
Next, Congresswoman Bentley will introduce an author, human rights activist, Dobrika Ćosić. Congresswoman Bentley.
I'm very pleased, Mr. Chairman, to introduce Mr. Dobrika Ćosić, who is regarded today as the greatest living Serbian writer. His novel, Time of Death, as a matter of fact, set during World War I, is a classic work and has been published in translation in the United States. During World War II, he fought with the partisan guerrilla forces against the Germans. He was a member of the Yugoslav Parliament from 1945 to 56. In 1968, he left the Parliament and was expelled from the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Since then, he's been an active opponent of the present government and is doing all he can to establish a democratic, multi-party system in Yugoslavia. In 1984, he founded the first Committee for Human Rights and Free Expression in Yugoslavia, and that committee defends those persons politically charged or politically discriminated against from all the nations of Yugoslavia and from all walks of life throughout the country. I might also point out, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Ćosić was active in the freeing of Mr. Paraga from prison. And since he does not speak English, he has come with a translation of his report, which will be read by our interpreter.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Bentley, for this very eloquent introduction. Mr. Ćosić, we are very pleased to have you, and we are looking forward to reading translation of your statement. If you'll pull the mic close to you, we'll be able to hear better.
Gospodine predsjedniče, dame i gospodo, pred vama ne zastupam srpsku naciju, ni srpsku i jugoslovensku državu, ni jednu političku partiju. Predsjedavam Odboru za odbranu slobode misli i izražavanja, Prvom komitetu za zaštitu ljudskih i građanskih prava u Jugoslaviji, osnovano 1984. godine, koji brani ljudska i građanska prava na jugoslovenskom tlu bez obzira na nacionalnu, religijsku i ideološku pripadnost ugroženih ljudi. Danas pred vama ne govorim ni u ime tog komiteta.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am not representing here either the Serbian nation or the Serbian or Yugoslav state, or for that matter, any political party. I preside over the Board for Defense of Freedom of Thought and Speech, which was the first committee for civil rights protection in Yugoslavia, established in 1984, which was a committee which defends human and civil rights in Yugoslavia, on Yugoslav soil, regardless of nationality, creed, political ideology, so long as they involve people imperiled in any way. Today, however, I do not speak on behalf of that committee either. I came here prompted by my conscience. Prompted by my conscience, I responded to your invitation.
Can you pull the mic a little closer to you so they'll hear you in the back?
Prompted by my conscience.
Better. Much better.
I came here to try and shed light on the true condition of human rights in Yugoslavia. The difficulty in understanding Yugoslav's situation, especially in Kosovo, because of international prejudices and reluctances to grasp historical and social roots and the genesis of national, religious, and ideological antagonisms in Yugoslavia, and the ones which are more and more intensified. All these have caused one of the biggest political untruths to be born in Europe and in America in recent times. I'm speaking about the untruth concerning Kosovo and the untruth concerning Serbia. These political untruths or lies have become a strong international factor in the dismantling of Yugoslavia, a factor in the deteriorating relations between the nations of Yugoslavia and the nations in the Balkans, a factor of the genuine historical tragedy of Serbian and Albanian peoples today. And if the events in Kosovo today are not reversed, Yugoslavia and that whole region of the Balkans may not exist tomorrow. In principle, I do not recognize either the ability or the right of any tribunal to judge what is freedom, what is truth and democracy in the contemporary world. It is difficult for me to acknowledge, to assign that judicial role in assessing the misfortunes in my country to any political parliament of a foreign country, even if such parliament is the one of the most democratic country in the world, the United States of America. But I accepted their invitation because I believe that human rights are a universal problem, the problem of our entire civilization. I therefore speak to you confident that democracy and the conscience of the American people, the people who have fought together with the Serbs in 2 world wars, defending the cause of freedom and democracy, will prevail. Forgive me if I voice my dissatisfaction with the findings of the Congress Helsinki Commission concerning the human and civil rights in Yugoslavia, and particularly in Kosovo. This report has upset not only me, it has upset the entire democratic community in Serbia and in Yugoslavia. Serbs, particularly Serbs in Kosovo, interviewed by the Helsinki Commission, cannot understand why American congressmen failed to mention their sufferings, their statements, the verifiable statements concerning violence and criminal offenses committed during the decades by Albanians against the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija. Crimes which were committed for the sole purpose of creating an ethnically pure Kosovo and establishing a great state of Albania. Without wishing to impugn the good intentions and proclaimed impartiality of the Helsinki Commission, I must, however, say that human rights are not violated in Kosovo alone, and that Albanians in Kosovo are far from being the only victims of the violation of human rights. The Serbs are the greater victim of such violations, because Serbs are the minority, and until these very days they have been deprived of the rights by the very state authorities dominated by Albanians of their human rights. Human rights and civil liberties, as we would like to see them in the civilized world, do not exist in the entire territory of Yugoslavia. I appeal to you to take into consideration that unless in your assessments and viewpoints there is no deeper understanding of the truth, no better knowledge of social situation and relations between the nations in Yugoslavia, and particularly between Serbian and Albanian nations, the standpoints of the Helsinki Commission of the American Congress would amount only to the factor of intensification. They would, in fact, simply intensify national, political, and religious confrontations in Kosovo, in Yugoslavia, and in the entire Balkans. In order to know the integral truth concerning the existential crisis in Yugoslavia, a crisis where civil rights problems are but a part of the complex of misfortunes and problems, one should master the history of Yugoslav peoples. No contemporary social or national problem may be understood in Europe, and especially in the Balkans and Yugoslavia, unless its historical roots and its genesis are known. Although Yugoslavia has been the most liberal among the countries dominated by the Communist Party, that country under Tito's autocracy did not become a democratic society. So long as Titoism, with its political monopoly of the Communist Party, the social order created by ideology of Bolshevism and Comintern Titoist Party, so long as they exist, human and civil rights shall continue to be restricted in that country. Thorough democratic transformation taking place in recent years in Yugoslavia has significantly extended the scope of political freedoms, and especially of scientific, academic, and artistic thinking, of political speech and organizing. But still, not all basic human and civil rights have been achieved and institutionalized. The party state is slow to change into a state based on laws. monistic political society is not yet established in the entire country, nor is a pluralistic society. But the strivings for a democratic order have begun and are irreversible, and there is no doubt that they are going to change the old order, which is dying. The greatest discontent that is felt over the issue of human rights is noted in the area of national rights. And such discontent is the deepest in the hearts of the Serbian people. The Serbs are the most numerous among Yugoslav nations, and they are the most degraded and the most subjugated in the Yugoslav multinational state. This degradation and subjugation caused by the ideology of an erroneous national policy instituted by Tito and the Comintern party then in power. Such emphasis on Serbian issues does not, however, exclude the fact that discontent and frustration are felt among other Yugoslav peoples regarding the realization of their human rights, although this does not apply to their national rights, which are fully recognized. For instance, in the Republic of Slovenia, more than 200,000 workers of various Yugoslav nations, ironically all called Bosnians, and Bosnians here is used as a term of derogatory description, are nationally discriminated against and socially degraded. In the coastal area of the Slovenian Republic, after World War II, there was an exodus of the Italian population which jeopardized the position of the remaining Italians remaining in Slovenia. Chauvinism is the very essence of Slovene national ideology, and it is favored by all Slovenian political parties now in existence. A society where xenophobia is a collective feeling cannot be a genuinely democratic society. In Croatia, the policy of national assimilation of Serbs, Italians has been going on for decades. Some 600 to 700,000 Serbs in Croatia are deprived of elementary cultural rights, language, school, press, national institutions, all those rights without which a man loses his historical, spiritual, and national identity. Such state of affairs, together with inequality in the sphere of the economy, gave rise to permanent emigrations of the Serbs out of Croatia. Moreover, the Serbophobia of major political parties, which based their programs on the exclusivity of Croatian national ideology, maintain among the Serbs the fear that the recurrence of the Ustaši genocide, which took place during World War II, may happen again. In the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, ethnic and political favoring of the Muslim population, as contrasted to the Serbian and Croatian ones, is more and more pervaded by the militant Islam expansionism coming to us from the Middle East. This has caused depression, psychological and social feelings of inequality as well, and it has led to a migration of Christian Serbs and Croats, but more particularly of Orthodox Serbs, out of Bosnia and Herzegovina, against the Serbs against whom the Muslim population has been towards whom the Muslim population has been traditionally antagonistic. One cannot ignore the aggression of Islam in recent decades against Yugoslav soil, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and the Serbian Sanjak. That skillful and planned aggressive Islamization causes tension among different religions as well as conflicts in ethnically mixed communities, while causing the suppression of Christian culture in that part of Europe and the ethnocentric concentrations in Yugoslavia. In such a situation, unavoidably, the basic human rights are violated and restricted. It is of utmost necessity to overcome ideological prejudices, to stop goading the Serbian people by accusing Serbia of Bolshevism and totalitarianism, And it also means giving up current communication and information stereotypes concerning the Yugoslav situations and misfortunes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate We appreciate your statement very much, and before I call on our next witness, I would like to call next on a most distinguished member of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, a member of its executive committee, and an indefatigable fighter for human rights for many years, Congressman Ben Gilman of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly want to welcome all of the witnesses, and I regret I was delayed in getting over here because of the business on the floor in the House. But I particularly welcome this opportunity to address the problems in Yugoslavia, and particularly in the Kosovo province. I'd like to read a quote. "Gradually, the age-old longing of the humankind for peace will be reflected in better governmental structures that will be forced to comply with the demands of a great and enlightened citizenry throughout the world." Mr. Chairman, those words were uttered by President Dwight Eisenhower on November 8, 1954, and they've never been more poignant than they are today. The raging tide of democratization in Eastern Europe makes more salient the issue of human rights and political autonomy for ethnic Albanians in the Kosovo province of Yugoslavia. In the recent past, military presence and violence and harassment in the province of Kosovo has provided an ominous reminder of the repression that comes from ethnocentric attitudes that have no place today in modern society. Last fall, a delegation of European parliamentarians visited the Kosovo province to investigate firsthand the human rights situation in that region, and they returned from their visit heartened by some progress in opening up that society, but dismayed by the lack of cooperation by the Yugoslav government officials in not permitting them to visit with dissident groups. They were afforded only second-hand level meetings with government officials. Recent events in Kosovo have created an ambience of optimism that has been wanting for years. On April 18, 1990, the President of Yugoslavia lifted the state of emergency in Kosovo, hopefully signifying a return to normal life for both Albanians and Serbs. It's our sincere hope that the decision to lift the state of emergency was made because the parties involved recognize that peaceful negotiation is the only effective means to solve the ethnic problems of Kosovo in a democratic manner. Hopefully, this will soon be followed by the release of all political prisoners and respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms in Kosovo. Permit me, Mr. Chairman, to thank our good friend, former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, for his outstanding work on this issue. I'd also like to thank our good co-chairman of the Human Rights Caucus, gentleman from California, Mr. Lantos, and co-chairman Porter, for their work not only on this issue, but for constantly and consistently advocating human rights for all peoples in all nations of the world. I'm here to listen, not to speak, and I look forward to hearing the remainder of our witnesses. I want to welcome the leaders from the Kosovo province who are here with us today through the arrangements of Congressman DioGuardi, and we want to welcome them to this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Congressman Gilman. It gives me great pleasure to call on a distinguished former colleague, most effective former member of the Executive Committee of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, who has fought for human rights on many continents and in many different situations, and who has taken such a prominent leadership role on this issue, the Honorable Joe DioGuardi.
Mr. Chairman, I see our good colleague, Congressman Hank Brown there, and I'm wondering whether or not he has other business, and I would be happy to defer to him if he has a statement.
I'll be most happy to call on my friend and colleague from Colorado if he would like to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suspect I will learn a great deal coming after our former colleague, so I will defer.
Thank you very much. It's all yours, Congressman DioGuardi.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, for all you are doing for oppressed people all over the world. Some of my proudest days in the House of Representatives was as an executive committee member of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, serving with you on so many issues, including Tibet and Soviet Jewry, and certainly the issue today in Kosovo. But I'm also very happy today to be still a part of you as a member of the board of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation. And I applaud all that you're doing there as well, and Congressman Gilman and Congressman Hank Brown, and thank you for your support. I have to thank the real freedom fighters today, my dear co-chairman, the people who died. Now, there are hundreds of people who have died. But it's not easy to get information in Yugoslavia, not easy at all. But let's start with the 27 documented cases in 1989 in those demonstrations, and the 34 documented cases early this year in January and February. And let's talk about the Gervala brothers that were killed and shot down in cold blood, along with another civil rights activist, Enver Hadre, and the papers in Brussels. I went there to eulogize him. The family allowed me to go to his funeral. The papers all pointed to the Serbian secret police, believe it or not. State terrorism is alive and well, maybe not in Moscow, but in Belgrade. And we've got to do something about it, and we've got to send a very, very strong signal. I was forced to go and testify. I wasn't forced to testify, but I was forced to wear a bulletproof vest when I went to Geneva, and again when I did rallies in front of the United Nations in New York. In Geneva, I went there because Mr. Hadre was shot down because he was ready to deliver to the Special Rapporteur the 34 names documented. I took those names literally off his body. His wife gave them to me, and I continued that journey under threats, and I had to wear a bulletproof vest. And you've heard the stories from Congressman Broomfield about Peter Iveze. Can you imagine 5 years after a demonstration in New York in 1981 or in Detroit, he goes back and they had his picture, Udba, and they arrested him and they put him in jail, and it literally took a hearing that I remember you were at, Congressman Gilman and Congressman Broomfield and myself, to get him released. And we have all this good news today. Why all of a sudden are the Serbs so generous? They're letting go Azem Vlasi and the other political prisoners, and they say all of them. I doubt that very much. And they're all of a sudden lifting a state of emergency. We know that is nonsense. We know that they're trying to paper over one of the most oppressive regimes the world has ever seen. Apartheid is alive and well. It now exists in Yugoslavia, in the Kosovo province. It is now gone from South Africa, or at least it's going. And Yugoslavia has a Nelson Mandela, or at least the Albanians have, Adam Damace, who was in jail for over 27 years. And Nelson Mandela was released before even any talk of releasing Adam Damace occurred. So I have to thank those freedom fighters that died, and I have to thank the 15 that flew here just in the last 2 days from Kosovo, and believe it or not, threats have already been received. There are security agents and FBI agents back there. Some have to travel in bulletproof limousines already. It's the truth. Now, if this is America, and if we're going to stand up for a system that is supposed to be equal and fair, certainly our government has to take a strong position. And I hope we're not going to be swayed by all of a sudden this generosity that comes on the day of our hearing, when you know they try to cancel this hearing, postpone it, and do so many other things. Let me also thank those hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 Albanians that listened to me as I made and spoke in your name, Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, because you know how hot it was out there. They listened to me, and as like the Pied Piper, they followed me outside, and I said, don't disrupt this hearing. Let it go. It's important for Kosovo. Wait the 2 and 3 hours. Be like Gandhi, like the people in Kosovo. The terrorists are not the Albanians. It's the Serbian authorities. The only ones that are being killed today are Albanians. The only lists of deaths that I see are Albanians, not Serbs. How can they be terrorists? The communists, and by the way, this is the issue. The issue is not religion. If it were religion, what are 1,500,000 Christian Slovenes doing supporting the Kosovars if this were a religious issue? The issue is not terrorism, not certainly Albanian terrorism, because Albanians don't fire back. They've learned to be like Gandhi, to be like Martin Luther King, and literally they demonstrated that today by leaving those halls outside so this meeting could continue, and they traveled from California, Dallas, and all over. And I want to thank those people as well. And I have to thank my good friend, Dr. Eva Brantley, who is right here with her great friend Waldo, who you gave the water to. She came with me to Geneva. She's not only a lawyer and a master's in law, she has her PhD. She's a doctor of law, one of the world's greatest human rights international lawyers who worked with the Solidarity movement in Poland. She is an ethnic Polish person, educated or raised in England and educated here at Harvard. And she understands the plight of the Albanians, and she has volunteered in her status as an NGO, non-governmental organization, to represent us at the UN. And I want to thank her for being here because she is the quintessential volunteer in America. The issue, my dear friends, is not ethnic, it's not religion, it's not separation, it's not terrorism, it's simple. It's democracy versus communism. We have Dr. Rogova, who you're going to see very shortly. He has now almost 700,000 members of his Democratic Alliance Party in less than a year. More than 100,000 of them have thrown their party cards, Communist Party cards, into the bonfires. That's the issue. And remember what J. Edgar Hoover said in that book that I remember reading in college. He entitled Masters of Deceit. There are no more professionals, better professionals of lies than communists. And today in Serbia, you have a one-man, one-party dictatorship that is trying to impose his will against all kinds of international conventions and law upon the people there. And many, many people are dying. Mr. Chairman, tyranny like hell, Thomas Paine said. Let's go back to the beginnings of this great country in the American Crisis Papers. He said, tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. In those days, they had the tyrant of the king, the monarchy. Today, the tyranny which must be overcome in the Kosovo crisis is what the U.S. Helsinki Watch report of that name describes as the, quote, the frightening example of one-party dictatorship, the full weight of a police state controlled by one ethnic minority unleashed against another ethnic minority. And so hell, as Thomas Paine said, which must be triumphed over in Kosovo, in its crisis, is the hell of a Serbian apartheid. I do not use that term lightly, but on the international criminal law definition that Dr. Brantley gave me. And let me give it to you. The term crime of apartheid is defined, and it shall apply to inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination of one racial group of persons over any other group of persons, or systematically oppressing them. That is what has gone on in South Africa. That is what's going on right now in Kosovo, even as we speak, because the state of emergency has not been lifted. That's what they said. Let's see what they're really doing. And they don't let too many people in to see what they're doing. I went there twice. I could not meet with the press. I was forced out of the hotel in Pristina, forced to do a press conference on the street, and they threatened to arrest me for a public display because that was against their law. You cannot talk on their streets. It's incredible that a system like this exists in the world today when there are 2 million, by their count, Albanians in that province, over 90%, and they want to emasculate them in every way. This definition of apartheid from Article 2 of the Convention of the Elimination of the Crime of Apartheid precisely captures the human rights situation in Kosovo. Beginning in 1988, the government of the Republic of Serbia has systematically and brutally repressed the Albanian people of Kosovo in order to impose Serbian hegemony over that province. This purpose has, however, been skillfully disguised by a carefully crafted Serbian disinformation crusade. You can't believe the propaganda machine that I face when I go to Belgrade and I try to give my press conferences there. The Serbian government formally launched an Albanian Kosovo subjugation campaign in late 1988 when it moved for the amendment of the Kosovo, Serbian, and Yugoslav constitutions. These amendments aim to abrogate Kosovo's status as an autonomous Yugoslav province and to subordinate its predominantly Albanian population, over 90%, to the Serbian rule. Nonviolent Albanian opposition to the amendments was met with police force, mass arrests, and imprisonment, and widespread dismissals from work. Indeed, according to the Yugoslav government statistics and published in 1989, of the 360 or 36 persons officially acknowledged to have been sentenced for political offenses in Yugoslavia during 1988, 336 were ethnic Albanians from Kosovo. Of the 517 political charges filed nationwide, 43% of the defendants were ethnic Albanians from Kosovo. Most of them were imprisoned and indicted for, quote, counter-revolution, hostile propaganda, or incitement of the ethnic unrest, close quote. That is, for taking part in a constitutional caucus, in protests, in meetings, or strikes, or for suspected participation in such assemblies or protests. Also, attendance, support, or suspicion of either resulted in arbitrary dismissal from work, and you'll hear that from some of the other witnesses that came all the way from Kosovo just yesterday. Oppression intensified throughout 1989 as the constitutional amendments near ratification secured passage in Kosovo, Serbian and Yugoslav assemblies, and finally entered into force. First, on February 27, 1989, the Serbian government imposed a state of emergency in Kosovo, banning all Albanian assemblies, strikes, protests, and political associations, imposing a police curfew throughout the province, and deploying thousands of troops and police in an open show of force. When I went there, you can't imagine what I saw. I went there twice, the first time in November. The hundreds of police deployed on every corner, 5 or 6, with automatic weapons. You can't imagine the kind of firepower that was used, or at least threatened to be used, and then used on the streets of Pristina and all over Kosovo. Second, 1 week before the definitive ratification vote, on March 28, 1989, Serbian authorities isolated, that is, detained on suspicion of certain putative criminal activity, Kosovo's ethnic Albanian leaders as a government countermeasure to any final anti-anatmic demonstrations. And third, on March 27 to 28, 1989, post-ratification demonstrations were dispersed by security police using, among others, automatic assault weapons armed with high-caliber live ammunition. And let me just stop here for a minute, because I have to summarize much of this, and I will insert it on the record. Do you know what really pains me today, Congressman Lantos, Congressman Gilman, and all the other esteemed members and former colleagues? The empty chair that's right here should have had Dr. Zekaria Tsana. On my second trip to Kosovo, no one made a better case than Dr. Tsana, who was the head of the Committee for Human Rights and the Defense of Human Rights in Kosovo. He was not able to come. Guess why? They took away his passport. They indicted him. They did not want him to be here. They know how effective he is. He showed me in his apartment the rubber bullets, some 3 inches high, 1 inch wide, that are used at close range to break bones. And if you go to a hospital because you have a broken bone or hit by a rubber bullet, that's automatic grounds for being arrested. So there are hundreds of young Albanian youth with broken bones in the homes that cannot do anything about it. This is the kind of terrorism that exists today. He showed me the dum-dum bullets. He showed me the automatic weapons and the bullets that are being used. It's incredible that that disproportionate kind of force can be used today against an unarmed population, but that is what is going on today in Kosovo, and that's what you have to hear about. Let me give you just some examples of what happened in those first days of April or in the demonstrations. One, in Zur, dozens of elementary school children were shot dead or injured when security forces indiscriminately shot at the demonstrating children from a helicopter. This is fact. Two, in Malasheva, Dim and Arsim Takarazizi, aged 7 and 8, were killed by security forces, although the police reportedly explained that the brother of one of the 2 children had been playing with a gun belonging to a soldier and had shot the children by mistake. 3, in Gilan, Basri Ibrahimi, age 24, was shot dead while he was in his car near a demonstration. It was alleged that the family members had been tortured and forced by the police to accept that he had committed suicide. And you can't imagine how many stories like that I hear. Official sources report 237 Albanians were isolated at the time of the final ratification vote, 41 of whom were eventually charged with criminal offenses and 18 with misdemeanors. The non-governmental Yugoslav-based Committee for the Defense of Human Rights in Kosovo gives the total of Albanian isolatees as 500. The official figure of 237 only takes account of the leading Albanian political activists who were isolated immediately before the ratification vote on suspicion of possible future membership in illegal associations, strike organizing, or contact with, quote, hostile immigrant groups. By the way, that includes me. When I went to Kosovo, they wouldn't take my business card, they wouldn't take a newsletter, because they said, Congressman DioGuardi, do you see all those police following you? And they followed me right off the plane, and they told me in Kosovo, you ought to turn back, it's dangerous for you, Mr. DioGuardi. I says, I'm not turning back. And I went, and they followed me, and they intimidated everybody that talked to me. But it is true, that kind of intimidation, if they had accepted merely a newsletter, later on, if they're found with it, they could be arrested on the spot for hostile propaganda under Article 133. This is what exists today. You talk about the breakdown of the rule of law. This is the problem we have today in Yugoslavia, especially Serbia. Many of the political and apolitical isolatees were held for up to 3 months in Serbian prison facilities, where they were often tortured and subjected to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment. The 1989 report of the Special Rapporteur on Torture to the United Nations Human Rights Commission gives the following example. This is not me, the Special Rapporteur. Following an appeal sent on 21 February 1989 to the authorities, 215 intellectuals were arrested and sent to the prison of Leskovic in Serbia. On the road to that prison, and in the prison itself, they were brutally beaten and subjected to various forms of torture, including planting of needles under their nails, squeezing the genitals, beating on the soles of their feet, and burning feet with burning paper. This is the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations speaking. Independent, I would think. Albanian intellectuals, engineers, and senior accountants whom I interviewed on my trips to Yugoslavia, 2 of them, those fact-finding missions, they repeated similar isolation experiences to me. In addition, Yugoslav civil rights lawyers in Belgrade, to whom I spoke, informed me that techniques similar to those described by the United Nations Special Rapporteur are routinely employed in political trials in order to intimidate witnesses for the defense. And we all know about Azim Vlasi. I won't go into the information on that, how he was arrested, all of the phony trumped-up charges, and all of a sudden today, because you insisted on having this hearing, and you know how they intimidated you, Congressman Lantos, up until Friday, the Yugoslav government gave you every reason, concocted reason to call it off. Today, finally, they had to let him go because they knew they could not intimidate you, thank God. Now, why didn't they let Dr. Zekeriya Tsana here? I don't know, but I would hope that you continue in your crusade, because I know the letter that you wrote last week with Congressman Broomfield and Congressman Porter, and also Senator Dole and Senator Pressler, that letter so that Zekeriya Tsana gets back his passport, because there's no graver violation except the right to life itself when it's taken than taking someone's passport away when they want to give testimony on human rights abuses. And that's what they did to Dr. Zekeriya Tsana. According to the United Nations Department of State report on human rights practices in 1989, at least 1,500 Albanians have been expelled from the Kosovo League of Communists for allegedly espousing nationalist and so-called separatist views. Everyone here, Congressman, has renounced separation. Even the Helsinki Watch when it went there. I heard about the discussions with Steny Hoyer. I heard how Dr. Rogova and the others said, we renounce violence, we renounce separation, we want to begin dialogue. And you know something? In that meeting, Mr. Marina, the puppet of the Serbian government, couldn't find one person he wanted to talk to in that room of these moderate leaders from Kosovo. They don't want to start a dialogue. It's not into Mr. Milosevic's interest. His only political platform has been built on the nationalism and stirring up these ancient hostilities. That's his political platform. and he's afraid to drop it because he knows he's losing day to day to Mr. Markovic. But he's holding as hostage right now 2 million Albanians in Kosovo, and that is the issue. Albanian workers have been massively purged from large and small enterprises. A mining engineer with whom I spoke to in Geneva told me in November of 1989, 787 Albanian miners were fired from the Stade Tar colliery, a colliery which employs some 3,000 workers. He said the reason the management gave the miners for their dismissals was that their names were on a, quote, list in the Kosovo Office of Internal Affairs. There's a segregation policy. There is an apartheid. And this policy extends to housing and education. For example, 2,000 houses for Serbs only have just been completed in the town of Obilic. And the elementary school in Preljuva Commune of Zrketurme will enroll only Serbian and no Albanian children. Moreover, since January of this year, Serbian and Albanian school children have been completely segregated from one another. Serbian children attend school in the morning, Albanian in the afternoon. This is how far it has gotten. This is what we have to send in independent bodies to investigate, and we need more of those independent bodies. This expansion of Serbian segregation has been accompanied by an escalation in the killing, torture, arbitrary arrest, and purging of Albanians in Kosovo during the first quarter of this year. For example, I'm almost complete. On January 27, 1990, the local police from the commune of Orachovic opened fire with automatic assault weapons on a peaceful pro-democracy march in the village of Brestovac. They did not warn the freedom-chanting marchers to disperse, but fired full M70 machine gun ammunition belts into the crowd, killing 4 people. Only after the fatal shots were fired did the police order the marchers to disperse, and they then used tear gas to break up the crowd. 3 days later, on January the 30th, that's this year, police assailed the village of Stanovic with machine gun fire, even though there was no demonstrations in progress at the time. They barraged the streets for an hour, killing 2 and seriously wounding more than 10 inhabitants. 2 of the wounded, Sadre Maksudi and Sadik Malai, were transported to the hospital in Vishturi. Before reaching the hospital, the truck was stopped by a Serbian security police patrol. The police ordered the 2 wounded men out of the truck and proceeded to beat and kick them to death. The autopsy report on Sudi Maksudi states that he died as a result of that beating. These are only 6 of the 34 documented cases I referred to before of Albanians killed by police during the pro-democracy demonstrations held in Kosovo between the end of January and the beginning of February of this year. The response of the Serbian government to these rallies was out of step with the rest of Eastern Europe and indeed with the rest of the world. Instead of entering into a dialogue with the Albanian people of Kosovo, the Serbian government dismissed 150 senior Albanian police officers who were then replaced by Serbs and created a new deputy prime ministership with sole responsibility for the maintenance of peace and order within Kosovo. Almost sounds like the ghetto in World War II in Warsaw. By peace and order, the government meant the containment of all Albanian aspirations for autonomy and status as a republic for Kosovo. Self-determination and self-representation were demands which the government said it would never countenance. The Serbian-nominated government of Kosovo resigned in protest of the government of the Republic of Serbia. The continuation of apartheid and the denial of democracy cannot restore political stability either in Yugoslavia or in Kosovo. The United States Congress, Mr. Chairman, has contributed to the liberalization of other countries in Eastern Europe, and I urge that it contribute likewise to the improvement of human rights conditions in Kosovo and Yugoslavia. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much, Congressman DioGuardi.
I have some couple of questions.
I would like to suggest that if any member of the panel has questions, if you take your seat, we'll proceed with questions.
Sure.
Congresswoman Bentley.
I do have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DioGuardi made some very strong statements, and I must say that I do not believe that there have been any threats against any of the lives of those who have come here from Kosovo. That I do not believe, Mr. Chairman, and I know that some of the FBI and others are here because I happened to call them. Me. Now, you also said that there is the fight is between communism versus democracy. How come, since communism is decreasing in Yugoslavia, this problem seems to be rising up to the top? Were conditions under Tito better at that time?
You're asking me.
I'm asking you.
Well,
you
let me
made
say
a
this.
statement.
I made a statement because I obviously am talking about Serbia, not Slovenia, not Croatia, not Bosnia.
I'm talking.
Because those republics are doing a
Mr.
good job.
DioGuardi, I asked you a specific question, and that question concerned the rise of the decrease of communism all over Yugoslavia.
Which I applaud,
Yeah,
except in Serbia.
Right, very good. And this problem is now rising. I'm asking you, were the conditions under Tito better? Since that is when communists really reigned.
Let me say this. I didn't spend much time studying Tito in my history books. I was studying
Too
Patrick
bad.
Henry, Thomas Paine, and I could say this, that...
Mr.
But I've had-
Chairman,
no,
will you
excuse
ask
me.
both sides to
But-
refrain from applauding
Yes.
so we can get on with this?
But I can say that recently I've spent a lot of time studying Mr. Milosevic. And let me tell you, he doesn't do himself or his people justice. I met with many prominent Serbs and had many good conversations with them in Belgrade. But the kind of political rancor he is creating for his own personal ambitions will be the undoing of his great republic and the undoing of Yugoslavia if he persists.
That, I'm sorry, communism none of us support. But you made a statement about communism, that this was communism versus democracy. And we do know that communism is decreasing all over. And we're all supporting it and we're all pushing for it. But this problem seems to be on the rise, and I'm just saying, I'm asking about the comparison, and you can't answer. Let me ask you a couple of other questions.
but I
You
can-
call this apartheid. Is there not a University of Pristina which was set up down there, and it is for the Albanians primarily? Do they have that in South Africa?
No, but do you know what they're doing now at that university? They've put out the students. They can't stay in the dorms. I mean, what they're doing right now is unconscionable.
We met with many of the students.
Okay, so let me say this.
I'm asking you another question. Is it not true that they have a radio station of their own? Do they have that in South Africa?
Let me say this.
Do they?
No one
You
dismisses
compared
the
them,
fact
Mr.
that-
DioGuardi.
No, listen, we can't go with relative justice. We have to
Mr.
go
DioGuardi,
with
you
what
made
is-
some very
Yeah.
inflammatory
I
statements
did,
here.
because Mr.
And I am
Milosevic
now
has been very
asking for
inflammatory
some-
against the Albanians, and someone has to speak up against them, and thank God we have the Congress of the United States to stand up for oppressed people, including the Kosovars.
Yes, but Mr. DioGuardi, you need to be accurate when you're a witness, especially when you're a paid lobbyist for a group.
I'm an
Now,
ethnic
you have
Albanian.
to be
I'm an ethnic
accurate.
Albanian. I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm the president of the Albanian American Civic League and the Albanian American Foundation, and I resent those intonations.
All right. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Chair would like to thank Congressman DioGuardi.
May I
for-
respond, please, to...
Of course.
Okay. I would like to say this. I don't indict the Serbian people. I don't question Congresswoman Bentley's motives. She's proud of her ethnic background the way I'm proud of mine. And I applaud her that she could stand up for them the way I stand up for Albanians. And I want to see freedom-loving people everywhere treated the way they're supposed to be treated. But Congresswoman Bentley, the Yugoslav Constitution says that all ethnic groups in Yugoslavia should be treated equally. I think the issue here today is that the Albanians are not getting the same treatment as the other groups, and really that's what this is all about, plus the fact that while communism is on the decrease in Yugoslavia in general, as we've seen with the Slovenian and the Croatian elections, it doesn't seem to be diminishing in Serbia, and that's the problem, because that's where Kosovo is. So let's hope we can all work together. The issue here is to get dialogue. You and I spoke over the weekend, and you said that perhaps we should sit down with Congressman Lantos, and I applaud you for that. I think that we should sit down. I went to speak to Milosevic. He wouldn't speak to me. Now, maybe I'm not the one he wants to speak to, but maybe there are others he should speak to. But how about you and me deciding to meet to see if we can find reasonable voices on both sides, to put them across the table, to finally get equality for everybody in Yugoslavia, because that's the way it is here in America, and that's God's way.
You know, that is very true, and I did make that statement, Mr. Chairman. However, to get something like that going, you don't come into a session and really throw gasoline on the fire. And I'm sorry, that's what you did today, Mr. DioGuardi.
Well, I hope I didn't, because
comments
I wanted to be factual, but thank you very much.
I want to thank you very much for your statement,
Mr. Chairman,
Congressman Gilman.
I just want to comment that we appreciate Mr. DioGuardi's, Congressman DioGuardi's efforts, not only today but in the past, for his continual fight for human rights, no matter where they may be, whether it's in Albania, whether it's in Yugoslavia, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Ireland, no matter where it is. Congressman DioGuardi has been an outstanding advocate of human rights, and we appreciate his continual efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Chairman will now call on his good friend and distinguished colleague from the state of Colorado, Congressman Hank Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me extend my thanks to the Human Rights Caucus for putting on this hearing. Some who don't know America well would wonder why we pay such great attention to human rights around the world. Critics often point out that America has problems too, and indeed we do. But the truth is, we have a special interest. We're not just a country who's made up of many races and many ethnic groups, which we are. It's part of the reason why we take a special interest in human rights around the world. But perhaps even more importantly, we as a people feel we were the first to hold up the torch of human freedom. And while we have many imperfections of our own, we have a continuing interest in the cause of human rights around the world. As the governments of Eastern Europe embrace the idea of freedom, Yugoslavia, who once led the way in Eastern Europe, has not made the progress others have. The democratic forces emerging in Yugoslavia have been met with crackdowns, incarceration of political prisoners, and imposition of martial law. For over a year, Serbian authorities imposed a state of emergency in the province of Kosovo. However, despite oppressive actions taken by the Yugoslav government, democratic political groups have blossomed and are now calling for autonomy and democracy. Since the democratization rallies began last year, hundreds of ethnic Albanians have been imprisoned. According to Amnesty International's 1989 report, many of those jailed stayed in prison for months without being charged and were subject to various forms of torture. State Department's 1989 report on human rights cites the Yugoslav practice of isolation against ethnic Albanians who were involved in the peaceful protest. The report states that 237 ethnic Albanians were rounded up, held for up to 3 months, and were denied access to attorneys and their families. The prisoners were held in Serbian prisons and were subject to beatings, harsh temperatures, inadequate food, and relentless interrogations. Since 1981, the majority of political prisoners in Yugoslavia have been ethnic Albanians. The Yugoslav government recently lifting the state of emergency in the province of Kosovo in its order to pardon 108 political prisoners is clearly a positive step, and it's hopeful that the beginning of a new era of autonomy and democracy can begin throughout all of Yugoslavia. We will have to continue to closely monitor the situation and to ensure that democratic political parties are given the opportunity to hold free elections and the democratic process is given a chance to flourish. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for this opportunity, but I want to reiterate, all Americans have an interest in freedom around the world. Where one suffers, one is denied political rights, ones are enslaved, ones are beaten, Americans must speak out. Our voice must be heard. It's proper for us to have this hearing. It's proper for us to voice concern. And let's hope that our concern is contagious around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Next, it is my pleasure to call on Congresswoman Helen Dalich Bentley, who will make a statement and then introduce several of the witnesses who were brought here through the courtesy of her efforts. Congresswoman Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Mr. Chairman, you and I have talked about this many times, and I do want to commend you and thank you for holding this hearing and for holding it together. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I am of Serbian background. My parents were both immigrants to this country many years ago, and I'm very proud of that background. I also am proud to be a member of the Human Rights Caucus on the Executive Committee in order to support all of the efforts for human rights all around the world. But, Mr. Chairman, I have to say that who would have thought 600 years ago that the Second Battle of Kosovo would take place in the halls of the United States Congress? Only this past week, Albania has indicated for the very first time that it is interested in establishing any dialogue with the outside world, the first time in 45 years. And yet it's already been said, Mr. Chairman, I won't repeat it, that Yugoslavia has been the most open of the East European countries. Now it is one that's dragging its feet in throwing down communism, and we all want it to move into that world very, very fast and to become a truly democratic country as fast as possible. Now, I do want to point out the gentleman from Freedom House mentioned about the economic problems there. When we met with President Markovic, Mr. Chairman, he did say that they had the inflation under control. In fact, it's down to zero. And they have made tremendous turnarounds, and I'm very pleased to read over the weekend that President Markovic of Yugoslavia said there would be multi-party elections on a federal or national basis of that country before the end of this year, or at least early next year. And we know that the republics of Slovenia and Croatia have already had these, and hopefully the other republics, including Serbia, will be doing so in the forthcoming months as well. These are all some positive moves that are tied in also with the turnaround of the economy. And we're asking, Mr. Chairman, is there any room for improvement of human rights? You bet there is, throughout Yugoslavia in every way. Has progress been made? Yes, it has. And some of those points have been outlined. I won't repeat them. I will simply say that I did have the occasion of sitting next to Mrs. Vlassi during dinner while we were in Kosovo 2 weeks ago, and I told her that I had pushed hard for at least an open trial for her husband. And I'm very glad that it was open, and I'm very glad that the courts have set him free and set the others free. Now, Mr. Chairman, there are many other bits concerning human rights, and that time is running out. I do want to say this in summary, though, that for the benefit of all of the republics and all the peoples of Yugoslavia, that it is vital that whatever happens over there is that the country remains intact, because the dismantling of Yugoslavia could be a severe blow to all of Europe and to the Western world, and that is something that we must try in every way to prevent from happening. Mr. Chairman, I am now very happy to have a statement presented by the clergy who have come from Kosovo and Metohija, Bishop Paul of Kosovo and Metohija, Archimandrite Dr. Atanasia Jevcic, who is representing the Patriarchate of Peć. He's also a professor at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Belgrade, and he's traveled to many intra-Christian and intra-faith conferences around the world. And also they are accompanied by Archpriest Milutin Timoteovic of Prizren, who's Dean of the Serbian Orthodox Seminary in Prizren. The three gentlemen the three clergy will take their...
We are very pleased to have you. Please take your seats, and we look forward to listening to your presentation.
I might just comment, Mr. Chairman, that both Bishop Fall and our theologists have been beaten and assaulted personally in Kosovo. Okay. Because of, again, the language problem, our wonderful translator is going to read their statement in English, Mr. Chairman, in the essence of time.
Although Kosovo indeed is considered by the Serbs as the cradle of their state, of their past, and although indeed Kosovo was once predominantly a Serbian region, today it finds itself in an extraordinary position where the original inhabitants of Kosovo are in the minority. But we would like to give you some statistical data to explain this somewhat artificially created picture. Making use of autonomy, of very extended autonomy granted to the Albanians by the 1974 Constitution and enlarged upon it during many years, the Albanians used this artificially created majority to continue the persecution and extermination of the Serbs still remaining in Kosovo. However, statistical data give the following picture. In 1945, in all of Serbia, Albanians accounted for 8.1%. The remainder were the Serbs. In artificially separated Kosovo, the Albanians accounted for 73% and the Serbs for 27%. In the Republic of Serbia today, Albanians number only 14% of the total population of this republic, in which they enjoy all national rights, enjoyed by national minorities the world over. These are the facts that one must bear in mind, rather than the fact that Stalin-inspired and artificially created autonomous province of Kosovo is now 89% Albanian and only 11% Serbian. We would like also to say that we do not deny that currently in Kosovo, certain Albanian individuals and groups, particularly young ones, have their problems with the communist regime. We would like, however, to inquire, to point out that the communist regime in Albania, in the country of Albania, is far more repressive than it is in Yugoslavia, and yet these same individuals, who could be named but won't, and groups find no cause to dissent from it. They give it rather their full support. We sincerely regret all arrests and persecutions, and particularly the loss of precious lives, particularly of the young people. And we have personally, as men of the cloth and men of letters, protested against such incidents and demanded that the victims be freed. We maintain, however, and have so publicly stated in our protests, appeals and complaints, that the sufferings of the Serbian people and the Serbian Orthodox Church in Kosovo and Metohija at the hands of the communists are incomparably more severe, because the Serbs have been systematically denied real civil and religious rights ever since the fascist occupation in 1941 and the advent of communist tyranny in 1945, while their Albanian neighbors were granted ever-increasing autonomy. We'd like to mention that the majority of some 1,300 Serbian churches and monasteries in Kosovo were recently, in 87 actually, entered in official records by Albanian authorities as mosques in order to facilitate their subsequent Albanianization and Islamization. In Kosovo, 80% of the government, of administration, is in the hands of the Albanians. That's a fact. In addition, they are fully represented in legislative and executive branches of government at the Republican and federal levels. Clearly, the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Serbian people in Kosovo have by far more reason to be dissatisfied with the communist rule than their Albanian neighbors. But they do not vent their dissatisfaction on the Albanians, with whom they try to live in peaceful coexistence. Why does the majority of Albanians in Kosovo then try to resolve its problems with the communist regime by tyrannizing the innocent Serbian population and the Serbian Orthodox Church in Kosovo and Metohija? In our view, the solution to the Kosovo problem lies in the decommunization of Kosovo and the establishment of an order which will be truly free and based on laws equitable for all who live in this region. The Serbian people in Kosovo suffer daily persecutions and harassment, but as men and Christians, we consider that by far more unfortunate and tragic is the lot of any Albanian in Kosovo who has been lured into participating in this tyranny against the Serbian people and the destruction of its church, its culture, history, and spiritual identity. What is it that ideological and political leaders of the Albanian aggression in Kosovo think they are teaching their children when they incite them to commit crimes and acts of inhumanity against their innocent neighbors who have lived in Kosovo for centuries? In the time allotted, it is impossible to give you an exhaustive list, or any list at all, of concrete examples of persecutions and harassment to which the Serbian population of Kosovo has been subjected for nearly half a century now. We have here pages upon pages upon pages of verifiable instances illustrating these instances. We leave them with you for you to peruse at leisure. We trust you will do so. There are, however, two examples which we must cite here. One is the case of the monastery Devic, whose abbess, Mother Paraskeva, was physically abused several times. Her one remaining healthy arm was broken so as to prevent her from making the sign of the cross. The second example is the case of His Grace Bishop Paul of Prizren, who is sitting here before you. Neither his high ecclesiastic rank nor his venerable age prevented his attackers, his Albanian attackers, from beating him savagely twice in the streets of Prizren. Today, when everything is changing for the better in Eastern Europe, Kosovo alone remains in the grip of insanity of a communist creation, the victims of which are the Serbian population of Kosovo and its shrines. The Christian West cannot, or perhaps will not, see this. Once before in history, because of this short-sightedness of the West, the Balkans, which at that time were the most cultured part of Europe, the very source of its civilization, and the Balkan Christians remained enslaved under the Ottoman rule for 2 centuries longer than they need have done. Must history always repeat itself? We have not come here to beg, but to tell the truth, to which we bear witness. We bear witness with the vestments and the crosses which we wear, with the cross which we bear, and with which we stand before you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and in the name of our people, from whose pure heart and mind comes every word uttered by us here. If you have heard us, we thank you.
Thank you very much for thank you very much for your most eloquent and powerful statement, and I want to thank all of the witnesses.